Oops.
Does that look all right?
Yep. It does, but I think we missed your first slide. Do you want to go back?
No, no, I don't think so.
That's fine.
It's just behind this one.
Fair enough.
You mentioned the boys a few times, and one of the things that I'm going to come back to is gender on this topic. But really what we're talking about with STEM is about careers and potential occupations mostly. And I think one of the things that we have to question is to what extent do we stereotype them ourselves, and practitioners stereotype them ourselves. I think anecdotally, I've often been called upon to talk about this, and I started my working life as an electronics engineer. I trained in the 1960s, actually, as an electronics engineer. So in those days, there were still radios and TVs with valves in them that lit up. And I was one of the first generation of engineers who was taught electronics with transistors. So I was ahead of the field, and it gave me a meteoric rise in the profession, actually. I was at a very young age, well over the national average salary, with all the benefits that came with that. And then I was de-skilled. Electronics, engineering, and certainly the maintenance that I was doing at the end of that period on very large computer systems actually ended. Instead of having people like me who could fault find at a discrete component level, they brought in people that they trained for just a couple of months, and they changed whole component assemblies and used diagnostics to identify which assembly needed to be changed, which was repaired by machine. And electronics has changed so dramatically over the years. It's a very good example of STEM careers. And I'm quite startled by some of the illustrations that are given in STEM, because as an engineer, I had to be good at communications. I had to be really good at communications. I had to be able to write. I had to be able to argue a case for the particular parts of the equipment that I was responsible for not being the problem when they weren't a problem, and to make the case for funding and all kinds of things which don't fit the stereotype of an engineer very well at all. And I had to be creative. Literacy was certainly one of the most key aspects of it, but the whole curriculum was really very, very relevant to engineering at that time, and I think it still is. We tend to stereotype these careers ourselves, so it's not at all surprising that children do it as well. So when we think about what children know about these occupations, we need to think about what the person does, what the occupation is actually engaged in, what work it is. And from a schema play perspective, of course, I'm going to identify the schemes that are fundamental to these occupations. But the question I want to ask and sort of think about it at the beginning is, does national curriculum or the areas of learning and development actually help in any way in this area, in helping children to understand what these subjects are all about? And does STEM? STEM was originally created as a concept in the USA. If you look at all the original justifications from it, they come from industry and business. They're all about improving economic competitive performance internationally. They're all about improving defense, even writing about how useful it is as a concept when you look at immigration policies, for example. But all of that's been adopted by the DFE, and it's being promoted quite strongly. And there's been a bit of a reaction against it. So we've got SHAPE, the social sciences, humanities and arts for people in the economy, which has been created by the arts councils as a way of encouraging more people to go into those areas of the curriculum as well. So there's a competition for resourcing that this is actually based on originally. But most of us, I think, are more concerned about it because of gender. And if you look at the two most gendered occupations in the UK at the moment, they're these: nursery nurses and assistants, 97.7% is female. And vehicle technicians, mechanics and electricians, it's 99% of that profession are male. So these are the occupations that are most strongly gendered. And it's not surprising that children get the impression that these are men's and women's occupations, because that's the truth. That's actually what's out there. That's what they see on a day-to-day basis. And we need to change that. We certainly need to change that. We need to change the way we portray the occupations. We need to make sure the storybooks and all that reflect non-traditional roles. We need to deal with the unconscious biases, the biases that encourage us to give boys toys and girls toys. And we've all seen research and many TV programs that have targeted this subject, and mostly people are not aware that they're doing it when they do it. So that sexism in early childhood education is something we need to confront. That's not STEM. STEM is something else, isn't it? If we look at what children actually do get from these stereotypical jobs, I mean, this particular survey was done by one poll very recently, but it was a large one. It was a couple of thousand children. And you can see they're quite polarized, the particular careers that they see most appropriately to boys and girls. And they're not necessarily the ones that you would think of as being STEM professions, or certainly not the ones that are promoted at the school and the university level as STEM subjects, the laboratory science and the engineering, etc. Quite often they're much more the things that the occupations that children see people engaged in that we need to focus on. So I'm going to argue two things now on the interests of sustainability, and all of those sustainable development goals I've listed there are very relevant to this subject, I think, in their different ways. What I want to argue is STEM's part of the problem. It's not part of the solution to any of this. And a sustainable curriculum needs to be integrated and transdisciplinary. You may not have come across that word before. It's like interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary, but it's saying go beyond it. It's a word that was actually coined originally by Piaget in the 1970s, curiously. But it's about going beyond the subjects and actually creating knowledge that's beyond each one of them through combining them together. And UNESCO, in their learning objectives for sustainable development, which was 5 years in the development, make this statement: what ESD requires is a shift from teaching to learning. It asks for an action-orientated, transformative, that's a key word here, pedagogy which supports self-directed learning, participation, collaboration, problem orientation, inter and transdisciplinary, and the linking of formal and informal education. That really is a transformation of our curriculum. The reason that the October DFE document on sustainability is not fit for purpose is because it suggests that sustainable development education can happen in the separate subject areas of the curriculum. It can't. It can't, because it has to go beyond that. It has to actually draw upon those subject areas, but actually take a very different perspective for it. And of course, that's also true of the areas of learning and development in the early years foundation stage, which don't make any sense from a learning perspective for the child. Children aren't aware of those subject areas, so why on earth would they be helpful in terms of curriculum either? If we just look at the inequality aspect of this, what we've got here is a problem that most people see as, and there's lots and lots of research that shows that boys tend to have a preference and a more confidence in STEM subjects. Many boys are not motivated by literacy and language as well. That's also a very key problem that we have. They're both to do with occupational stereotypes. They're both to do with attitudes just as much as capabilities. And they're both very strongly research evidence-based. Many girls have a preference and confidence in literacy and language, and many girls are not motivated by STEM. Now, usually what the solution that's prescribed for this is to encourage girls to do more STEM and boys to do more literacy and language. And I'd say that that line is supposed to be through the words, but I've obviously missed there. I think that's completely wrong. What we need to do is actually take seriously the fact that they're motivated. The boys are motivated by STEM. Therefore, we should give them STEM, but we should give them STEM the way it is in the real world. We should give them STEM with language and literacy in it. And girls are really interested in language and literacy. What we should do is give them what they're motivated in, but give STEM in it so that we're actually drawing upon what they know and they do and they're interested in, and that will solve the problem. That means STEM L2, language and literacy added to it, and not STEM at all. And one of the main reasons that this is so important for sustainability, I mean, that's just a practical issue. That's a practical argument. It won't work unless you do it that way as far as education is concerned. But in terms of sustainability, what we have are wicked problems. We have problems that don't have a single scientific explanation or solution for them. Even something as mundane as choosing your next car is a wicked problem. There are lots of contradictions in the decision-making that you have to take. It's not straightforward. You can't go to one discipline, whether it be economics or engineering or whatever, and find a solution off the shelf. You actually have to consider multiple issues: your use, the kinds of roads you've got, the energy source. There are so many different questions that it defies single subject analysis, in fact. We need a more integrated curriculum for sustainability and not a less integrated. Pulling subjects together and saying that they are somehow closely related to each other hasn't been established by anybody, and also it's going in the wrong direction. That's my argument. So what do we do? Encourage, oh, that's interesting, it works now. Encourage more. One of the things we need to tell practitioners, I think, is that their stereotypes are wrong. So let's take the difference between girls and boys in STEM subjects. These are the grades in schools. It's a big meta-analysis. So many studies have been compiled to get these statistics. But what they show is that, generally speaking, girls are better at STEM than boys in school. They do better at every level. I think the most important thing that these distributions, according to gender of STEM subjects, is there's greater variation in STEM capability within each gender between boys than there is between boys and girls. And that's true of most inequality issues, whether you're talking about racism, sexism, whatever. The variation within a group is greater than the variation between groups. We imagine it's greater than it really is. What these graphs show is that for the very most capable boys, they do better at STEM than the girls. But overall, the average girl does better than the average boy at the same time. And what seems to be happening is at the end, what the industry wants are the most capable children to go into STEM careers, and they're missing out on the girls because they're choosing not to do it. And they're choosing not to do it because of all those stereotypes of occupation. So they can't be such a good girl or woman if they take one of those careers. Other people will see them less gendered because they take those careers. And that's the disincentive. So what we should be doing is actually focusing on that the stereotype is actually in the subject itself, in the occupation itself. And that's where the emphasis should actually lie. Changing people's views of what an engineer actually does for a living. Because we're wrong. It isn't a job that's just about mechanics or spatial capability. One of the key things that's happened in my educational career that I think illustrates this so well is that we dumped IT as a subject in schools. And we dumped IT in schools because it wasn't fit for purpose. Because a lot of the time, the children were actually in advance of the teachers in IT. The teachers couldn't keep up. And partly because we were trying to teach them to operate IT when what we really need is people who can invent IT and develop new ITs. One of the key things that's come out of that whole debate is the notion of computational thinking, which actually goes beyond the technology to become focusing on the abstraction process itself, the thinking skills, which in early childhood, of course, is so obvious to us. We know that the skills, the thinking skills that children develop in language are applied to mathematics just as much as they are to language and to writing and reading and to basic arithmetic. They're all the same. So if we focus on those general areas, the integration, then we'll actually have something which is responding to children's educational needs and not to the needs of industry or employment. But this is a problem that has become apparent with IT. It's actually true of the whole curriculum. So as far as industry is concerned and the sustainable development of industry and jobs and the economy, it's in our interest to actually go beyond STEM to do that. The other reason is, of course, directly related to the three pillars of sustainability. We all know that we need to make our decisions, our development decisions, based on not just the economic criteria, but also the environmental and the social cultural implications of development. And when this was first introduced, people were more concerned about the big policy decisions for housing and for road systems and transport for cities. And a lot of the bad decisions were made on purely economic grounds. And we needed to get the professionals who were involved in environmental studies and in social cultural knowledge areas to actually come together and make decisions that would be more sustainable. And there were so many examples of large-scale projects, and they still exist, of course, large-scale projects, which, unless we actually take an integrated subject perspective, we're going to keep getting them wrong. And as I said at the beginning, this is true at a personal consumption level, just as much as anything. I gave the example of a car, but when you buy a washing machine for the nursery, there are so many complicated issues to actually address there that it is a wicked problem. And whether you're deciding on the toothbrushes, as Cheryl has actually talked about a couple of times in our meetings, there are fors and against every single solution. They're not straightforwardly decided by a particular perspective of a research. You need to actually integrate all the time, practically, to make all of these decisions. And where did those three pillars come from? They came from ecology. They came from a recognition that you need those three things for survival, not just for sustainability. And it's all about adaptation to our environment and to survive in our environment. And every living organism requires those three criteria. Social cultural extends beyond, of course, the population to actually look at other species and our relationship with the rest of the natural world. But the key area that is common to all of these contexts is being economic. It's actually living within your means, to actually think about what the biologists call the principle of least effort, that whether you're a plant or a single-celled organism or a human being, you have to actually take into consideration all of the time. You have to account for your costs, sustain energy resources. So environment, social, cultural, they're not just policy imperatives that we use in sustainable development education. They're actually based on basic economic facts of evolution that if we ignore them, we're ignoring life and the possibility for future life. And we need to teach children about wicked problems. We need to explain to children that there isn't a single answer to nearly all the most important questions that we want to address. We need to actually introduce them to not single subjects where there is a single answer for every question, but a subject, sustainability, which allows them to draw on different subject disciplines to come up with solutions that they can try out in different contexts. And that's a long way away from where we are right now, I think. I hope I haven't been too theoretical in all of that, but I wanted to get across quite a lot in a short period of time. And I think STEM has been something that I felt for many years is much more of a problem for sustainability than it's any kind of solution to, for example, the gender issues within sustainability. So I'm going to end there and